My ex-fiancé sold me to a monster, expecting me to die on my wedding night. He made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't know that my absolute purity would awaken a terrifying obsession inside the most dangerous alpha on earth. Now, the men who threw me away are crawling on ice, begging for mercy. But my fierce new king has already promised, anyone who made me cry will burn. Welcome to Luna's Secret Library. On this channel, you can enjoy all sorts of romantic love stories. If you like my stories, please subscribe to my channel for more wonderful tales. The heavy iron doors groaned shut like a sealing tomb. Evelyn shivered beneath the crushing weight of her silk veil. She was no longer a beloved daughter of the sunny southern valleys. She was merely a desperate political tribute. Outside the freezing chamber, the savage howling of the pack ripped through the midnight air. They were loudly celebrating the forced union of blood and iron. She sat frozen on the edge of the massive fur-lined bed. Her heart hammered frantically against her ribs like a trapped little bird. The dark room smelled intensely of cold stone and ancient pine. Then, the terrifying footsteps finally approached the wooden door. They were heavy and incredibly deliberate. It was the distinct sound of an apex predator who owned every inch of the earth. The heavy door creaked open violently. The temperature in the large room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Silas stepped inside the room. His overwhelming presence filled the space until there was absolutely no air left to breathe. He was much taller and broader than the terrifying stories had suggested. His shoulders looked broad enough to carry the immense weight of an entire kingdom. His eyes were definitely not human. They glowed with a feral, predatory amber light that easily pierced the thick darkness. "Look at me," he commanded harshly. His deep voice was a low, dangerous growl that vibrated right into Evelyn's very marrow. With violently trembling fingers, she slowly lifted the delicate lace veil. She revealed a face of absolute porcelain perfection and wide eyes filled with pure terror. Silas froze completely in his tracks. He had fully expected a dangerous spy sent by his bitter enemies. He had expected a hardened, experienced woman meant to slowly weaken his iron rule. Instead, he saw a fragile girl who looked like she had been carved from pure moonlight. He slowly approached her trembling figure. The overwhelming scent of freezing rain and pure dominance rolled off his large body in heavy waves. "Do you know what they say about me, little bird?" he asked softly. He roughly tilted her delicate chin up with a thick, leather-gloved hand. "They say you have absolutely no heart," she whispered weakly. Her soft voice broke miserably on the last terrifying word. Silas let out a harsh, incredibly dry laugh that held absolutely no joy. "I have a beating heart. It just beats purely for blood, never for love." He suddenly gripped her narrow waist with terrifying speed. He forcefully pulled her flush against his incredibly hard, leather-clad chest. Evelyn gasped loudly in pure shock. Her small hands instinctively clutched his massive, muscular forearms to keep from falling. She felt the terrifying, raw power radiating violently from his hot skin. It was the intense heat of a savage beast barely restrained by a human shell. He slowly lowered his large head toward her neck. His straight nose brushed intimately against the frantic pulse point of her pale throat. He inhaled deeply and greedily. He caught her unique, intoxicating scent of lavender and sweet honey. But there was something else entirely beneath the floral notes. It was something completely untainted and incredibly rare. His sudden movements became significantly more aggressive and demanding. He was suddenly fueled by an unexpected, incredibly violent hunger. He roughly pushed her back onto the soft animal furs of the bed. His massive body easily pinned her down with terrifying, effortless strength. "This is strictly a political contract," he muttered darkly against her soft skin. "Do not expect any gentle romance from me tonight." He began to carelessly tear away the intricate, expensive lace of her wedding gown. His strict mind was fully set on completing a cold, entirely clinical duty to his pack. But as his rough hands moved over her delicate curves, he felt something completely unexpected. He felt the frantic, helpless, rhythmic trembling of her slender limbs. He felt the distinct way she instinctively shrunk back from his heavy touch. It was not a reaction born of hatred or political defiance. It was a physical reaction born of total, bewildering innocence and profound ignorance. Silas paused his aggressive assault immediately. His glowing amber eyes narrowed dangerously as he looked down at her flushed, tear-stained face. "How many men have there been before me?" he demanded fiercely. His deep voice dropped to a highly dangerous, threatening whisper. Evelyn shook her head frantically side to side. Hot, silent tears spilled continuously onto her pale, frightened cheeks. "None," she managed to choke out through her tight, closing throat. "There has been absolutely no one before you." The heavy silence that immediately followed her desperate confession was completely deafening. Silas felt a massive jolt of electricity shoot directly through his rigid spine. A deeply primal, entirely savage instinct screamed for absolute dominance inside his head. He simply didn't believe her impossible words. He genuinely couldn't bring himself to believe such a ridiculous fairy tale. In his brutal, unforgiving world, total purity was nothing but a foolish myth. It was a silly bedtime story told to innocent young children. He immediately reached further down to uncover the real truth. His demanding touch sought the absolute proof that her sweet words could not provide. And then, to his utter, world-shattering shock, he actually found it. He found the undeniable, physical proof of her complete and total innocence. The great alpha's steady breath hitched painfully in his tight throat. A dark, highly intoxicating, and completely foreign heat flooded his thick veins. It instantly turned his cold blood into rushing, boiling liquid fire. He had spent his entire harsh life constantly surrounded by dark shadows and endless betrayal. He had never once touched something so incredibly fragile. He had never claimed a territory so entirely unmapped and perfectly pristine. The sudden, overwhelming realization completely shattered his legendary, unbreakable self-control. His pupils dilated rapidly until his amber eyes were almost entirely black with pure lust. The savage beast deeply hidden within him violently broke all its heavy mental chains. "You are entirely mine," he growled ferociously. The terrifying sound was significantly more wild wolf than civilized man. He didn't just want her soft body anymore. He desperately wanted to completely consume her entire innocent soul. He wanted to violently leave his permanent, unerasable mark on every single inch of this untouched territory. The cold, highly calculated alpha leader was completely and utterly gone. In his imposing place stood a feral male driven by a 1,000-year-old, insatiable hunger. Evelyn cried out loudly as he suddenly surged forward with terrifying speed. His rough, demanding kiss was a violent collision of burning fire and freezing ice. She had been repeatedly warned to deeply fear the cruel wolf of the north. But she realized with absolute clarity right now that those scary stories hadn't warned her nearly enough. He wasn't just a powerful, ruthless king. He was a devastating, unstoppable natural storm. And she was the only fragile, incredibly vulnerable thing standing directly in his destructive path. Every single forceful touch burned her sensitive skin like a branding iron. Every ragged breath he took seemed to selfishly steal all the remaining air from her burning lungs. Silas gripped the heavy wooden headboard with incredibly tight fists. The solid wood literally splintered and cracked loudly under his immense, uncontrollable physical strength. He was completely losing his sane mind in her intoxicating presence. He was drowning completely in the sheer, overwhelming, impossible reality of her absolute purity. "Please," she whimpered softly and pitifully into the dark room. She honestly didn't even know what she was desperately asking for from the beast. "There is absolutely no please for you tonight," Silas whispered harshly into her ear. His thick voice was heavy with a dark, deeply terrifying, and completely unavoidable promise. Tonight, I am going to show you exactly why the whole world fears the dark. He leaned down heavily, his sharp teeth forcefully grazing the sensitive, bare skin of her pale shoulder. The long, exhausting political hunt was finally over. But the true, absolute, and total conquest of her soul had only just begun. And as the silver moon reached its absolute peak in the sky, the most feared alpha completely lost all control. The first pale rays of dawn bled slowly through the narrow stone windows. They fell coldly across the tangled heavy furs and the shattered remnants of the wedding gown. Evelyn stirred weakly with a low moan escaping her swollen lips. Every single muscle in her fragile body ached with a heavy and unfamiliar weight. She opened her tired eyes and immediately felt the intense heat of a heavy gaze. Silas was sitting completely still at the very edge of the massive bed. His powerful torso was completely bare and covered in faded battle scars. He did not look like a tired man who had slept at all. He looked exactly like a ruthless king who had just conquered a new continent. His glowing amber eyes were fixed obsessively on the delicate marks blossoming on her pale skin. They were the undeniable physical evidence of his total loss of control last night. Evelyn tried desperately to pull the thick covers up with trembling fingers. "Do not ever hide from me," Silas commanded softly. His deep voice was no longer a terrifying roar but a dark and possessive purr. He reached out slowly with his large hand. He cupped her warm cheek with a terrifying and unexpected tenderness. "I honestly thought I knew what true hunger was," he whispered into the quiet room. "I have starved miserably in the frozen wilderness for months. I have bled heavily in the muddy trenches of endless wars. But last night I finally realized I have been completely empty my entire life." Evelyn looked deeply into his intense eyes. She was searching desperately for the cruel monster she had been told to fear. The dangerous monster was definitely still there. But now it was wrapped securely around her like a living, breathing shield. "You are completely different from the terrifying rumors," she whispered with a rasping voice. "You coldly claimed you had absolutely no heart. But your racing pulse against my skin was so incredibly fast." Silas stiffened immediately at her bold words. His strong jaw tightened dangerously until the thick bone nearly snapped. "My rapid pulse was a severe warning," he growled darkly. "It was a warning that I will never let you leave this stone fortress alive." He stood up abruptly in the cold room. His massive, intimidating frame completely blocked the morning light. "The impatient elders are waiting for us right now in the Great Hall," he announced. "They expect to see the brand new Lunar of the North. They expect to see the undeniable proof of our permanent union." Evelyn felt a fresh, suffocating wave of blind panic wash over her. The legendary Pack of the North was globally famous for its extreme brutality and harsh judgment. "I cannot possibly go out there and face them," she pleaded desperately. "I am just a weak southern girl and not one of your kind." Silas leaned down smoothly until his handsome face was mere inches from hers. "You are exactly what my dark soul desperately needed," he said firmly. His hot breath washed over her sensitive ear. "You are the only clean and pure thing in a world made entirely of filth." He grabbed a heavy robe made of thick, midnight blue velvet. He draped it carefully over her trembling, naked shoulders. "Stay incredibly close to my side at all times. Do not look directly at the other dangerous alphas. Do not speak a single word unless I explicitly command it." He led her firmly out of the cold bedchamber. His large, warm hand was anchored securely on the small of her delicate back. Every heavily armed guard they passed instantly dropped their head in absolute submission. The thick air in the great hall was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp wolf fur. Hundreds of massive, savage wolves were gathered together in the cavernous space. Their sharp eyes were incredibly hungry and calculating. They all wanted to see if the fragile southern girl had actually survived the Alpha's legendary rage. Silas led her confidently toward the high wooden throne. The imposing chair was carved entirely from the massive bones of ancient beasts. He did not sit down on the throne. He stood proudly before it while pulling Evelyn tightly against his side. "Listen to me right now," his booming voice thundered loudly. The deafening sound echoed violently off the high-vaulted ceiling. The noisy chatter in the hall died instantly. You could easily hear a tiny pin drop on the cold stone floor. "The political contract with the South is officially fulfilled," Silas declared boldly. His strong hand tightened possessively around her narrow waist. "But this is no longer a simple political arrangement." He looked down at Evelyn with a burning intensity. For a split second, the infamous cruelty in his amber eyes completely vanished. "She is now the pure blood of my blood. She is the absolute, beating soul of this entire Northern Territory." One of the senior elder alphas stepped forward from the shadows. He was a massive, intimidating man with a scarred left eye and a jagged gray beard. "And what about the permanent mark, Silas?" the elder challenged loudly. "Has the eternal claim been properly sealed in blood?" The massive crowd of wolves held its collective breath in heavy anticipation. A true claim was infinitely more powerful than just empty political words. It was a permanent, physical magic bond that linked two souls together until tragic death. Silas did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He turned Evelyn forcefully toward his massive chest. He completely ignored her soft, startled gasp of sudden surprise. He brushed her long, soft hair aside with practiced ease. He deliberately exposed the highly sensitive, pale curve where her delicate neck met her shoulder. "Close your beautiful eyes," he whispered darkly into her ear. Before she could even take a shallow breath, his sharp teeth sank deeply into her soft skin. It was not the violent, tearing bite of a hungry wild predator. It was the deliberate, magical seal of an overly possessive master. Liquid fire instantly erupted deep within Evelyn's racing veins. A brilliant golden heat raced madly straight toward her pounding heart. She felt his immense, ancient power pouring directly into her fragile body. It was a massive tidal wave of silver moonlight and dark, protective shadows. She gripped his broad shoulders desperately to keep her balance. Her short nails dug deeply into his hard muscles. The massive hall instantly erupted in a deafening, unified howl of deep respect. It was a terrifying, beautiful chorus of absolute recognition from the pack. Silas finally pulled back from her marked neck. His firm mouth was slightly stained with a single drop of her crimson blood. He licked his lips slowly with a terrifying, ecstatic light glowing in his eyes. "She is permanently mine," he roared furiously at the massive assembly. "If any man here dares to look at her with desire, I will brutally tear out his eyes. If any man speaks her sacred name without ultimate respect, I will violently cut out his tongue. She is the Alpha's chosen bride, and she is completely untouchable." Evelyn leaned heavily against his solid, warm chest. Her dizzy head was spinning wildly from the sheer intensity of the magical bond. She could actually feel his powerful heartbeat thumping perfectly in time with her own. She could feel his overwhelming possessiveness wrapping around her like a dark, heavy blanket. It completely smothered her previous lingering fears. She was definitely a captive prisoner in this harsh frozen wasteland. But as she looked at the kneeling warriors and the godlike man beside her, she felt a strange thrill. The most feared, cold-hearted alpha in the entire world had completely lost his control just for her. And now he was fully ready to set the entire world on fire just to keep her safe. He leaned down gently and kissed her smooth forehead in front of the entire deadly pack. "You belong entirely to the freezing north now, Evelyn," he murmured darkly. "And I will gladly spend every single night reminding you of that undeniable fact." The loud, raucous feast quickly began around them. But Silas never once let go of her small, trembling hand. He watched every single tiny movement she made with hawk-like precision. His insatiable hunger was only growing much stronger with the new magical mark. He had tasted her perfect purity last night. And now the dangerous wolf of the north was hopelessly and eternally addicted. The long, boring political hunt was finally over for good. The dark, consuming, and beautiful obsession had only just begun. The great hall was still echoing with the savage cheers of the massive northern pack. Evelyn felt the heavy gaze of 1,000 hungry wolves pressing against her pale skin. She was no longer just a terrified bride from the sunny valleys. She was the permanently marked property of the most dangerous man alive. Silas kept his muscular arm wrapped incredibly tight around her narrow waist. His iron grip was completely unforgiving and dangerously possessive. His massive body was a solid wall of unyielding muscle and searing heat. The golden mark on her delicate neck burned with a strange, intoxicating magical energy. It connected her racing human pulse directly to the terrifying alpha beside her. She could actually feel his powerful heartbeat thumping in a slow, highly dominant rhythm. She could also feel the dark, obsessive possessiveness radiating heavily from his core. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the ancient fortress crashed open with a deafening boom. The freezing, violent wind of the harsh north howled fiercely into the great room. Thick white snow swirled violently through the air and chilled the damp stone floor. 3 tall men stepped cautiously out of the blinding winter blizzard. They were dressed head to toe in the fine, brightly colored silks of the southern valleys. Evelyn's breath hitched sharply in her suddenly dry throat. Her shaking hands instantly gripped the heavy velvet robe draped over her fragile shoulders. She clearly recognized the intricate royal crest stitched in bright gold thread on their warm cloaks. They were her cruel father's elite royal guards. But more importantly, the furious young man leading them was Thomas. He was the handsome nobleman she was originally supposed to marry before the brutal war. Thomas looked around the savage, bloody hall with barely concealed disgust in his eyes. His delicate, aristocratic features were twisted in a nasty sneer of pure, arrogant contempt. His pale blue eyes finally landed directly on Evelyn. His handsome face instantly drained of all its healthy color. He clearly saw the torn velvet robe and the dark bruises on her pale skin. He also saw the fresh, bleeding bite mark sitting proudly on her elegant neck. "What have you done to my bride, you filthy monster?" Thomas shouted recklessly into the room. The entire massive hall fell into a deadly, suffocating silence in a mere fraction of a second. The loud, raucous celebration music stopped instantly as if cut by a sharp knife. The feasting northern wolves turned their large heads simultaneously toward the foolish intruder. Their feral eyes glowed ominously with pure murder in the dim, smoky light. The thick air grew so heavy with deadly tension that it was almost impossible to breathe. Silas did not flinch or take a single step backward. He did not even bother to raise his deep, commanding voice. A low, incredibly terrifying growl rumbled slowly from deep within his massive chest. It was the distinct, bone-chilling sound of an apex predator preparing to snap a fragile spine. "You dare to enter my frozen territory and question my absolute claim?" Silas asked softly. His glowing amber eyes locked onto Thomas with pure, unadulterated murderous intent. Evelyn felt a sudden, terrifying spike of adrenaline flooding Silas's powerful veins. Through the new magical bond, she could clearly feel his absolute, consuming, fiery rage. The ancient, bloodthirsty beast inside him was violently clawing at its heavy mental cage. He was absolutely going to slaughter Thomas right here on the cold stone floor. "She was officially promised to me by her father," Thomas yelled desperately. He foolishly drew a slender, highly polished silver sword from his jeweled scabbard. The expensive, delicate weapon looked incredibly pathetic against the backdrop of battle-hardened wolves. The seasoned northern wolves laughed together in a terrifying chorus of dark, mocking snarls. Silas slowly and deliberately released Evelyn's trembling waist. "Stay directly behind me," he ordered firmly. His deep voice echoed with absolute, unquestionable, and terrifying authority. He stepped smoothly down from the raised wooden dais. He moved toward the intruders with terrifying, liquid, predatory grace. He did not carry a single weapon because he simply did not need one to kill. She was a pathetic political tribute sent by weak cowards, Silas stated clearly. He walked slowly and menacingly toward the trembling, terrified southern men. She was a cheap pawn sent to buy your pathetic king another single year of peace. But then I discovered the ultimate, beautiful truth you tried so desperately to hide. He smiled darkly, a cruel, feral baring of long, razor-sharp white teeth. You sent me a completely untouched virgin. Thomas froze completely in pure shock. The fancy silver sword trembled violently in his sweaty, unsure grip. You blindly sent me something completely pure, and now she is forever mine, Silas gloated darkly. I have deeply tasted her absolute, perfect innocence. I have effortlessly broken down all her useless, fragile defenses. I have permanently marked her untouched, beautiful soul. She belongs completely to the harsh north, and she belongs exclusively to me. Evelyn watched the weak man she once thought she loved shrink miserably before the alpha. She fully expected to feel deep, agonizing pity for Thomas's public humiliation. She expected to feel a desperate, lingering urge to run away with him back to safety. But to her absolute, world-shattering shock, the golden bond pulsing in her neck changed everything. It only made her feel a twisted, dark, and overwhelming sense of pure pride. Silas was fiercely defending her honor with a feral ferocity she had never known in her entire life. He was proudly claiming her in front of the entire world without a single shred of hesitation. Silas stopped just inches away from Thomas's shaking, pointed silver blade. He didn't even bother to look down at the sharp steel pointed directly at his broad, muscular chest. I will give you exactly one single chance to leave this fortress alive, Silas whispered coldly. The dark, raspy whisper carried across the dead silent hall like a definitive, bloody death sentence. Tell her pathetic, cowardly father that the weak southern girl is completely dead. Tell him the powerful, untouchable Luna of the North has permanently taken her place. Thomas looked directly past the beast at Evelyn. His panicked, watery eyes were begging desperately for immediate salvation and help. Evelyn, please tell this monster you want to come home with me right now, Thomas begged pathetically. Tell him you absolutely do not belong here with these savage, filthy animals. Silas turned his large head slowly. His glowing amber eyes rested heavily and expectantly on Evelyn's pale face. The feared alpha did not speak a single word to her. But the highly lethal threat shining in his dark gaze was crystal clear to everyone. This was a highly dangerous, totally unforgiving, and absolute test of her ultimate loyalty. He desperately wanted to know right now if the little bird still dreamed of flying away. He needed to know if his fresh, bleeding mark was strong enough to hold her fragile soul. If she said yes to Thomas, the southern man would die a brutal, exceptionally bloody death immediately. Evelyn took a deep, grounding breath. The freezing cold air quickly filled her aching, tired lungs. She looked down at the weak, trembling, pathetic man from her fading past. Then she looked deeply at the terrifying, magnificent, and highly obsessive monster beside her. He had ruthlessly but completely claimed her entire future. She felt the overwhelming, highly protective power of the alpha wrapping securely around her soul. She stepped forward confidently. She stood proudly and firmly right beside Silas. She did not tremble or hesitate for a single, fleeting second. I have absolutely no home left in the weak South, Evelyn said clearly and loudly. Her steady, confident voice rang out beautifully. It effectively silenced the howling, raging wind just outside the thick stone walls. I am entirely bound to the alpha now, and I choose to stay. Silas let out a dark, immensely satisfied, and terrifying chuckle that sent delightful shivers down her spine. The ravenous, possessive beast deeply hidden within him was immensely and thoroughly pleased by her total submission. Thomas dropped his useless silver sword in pure despair. His handsome face was completely pale with utter, crushing, and final defeat. The loud clang of the metal hitting the stone floor sounded exactly like a gloomy funeral bell. "You have completely doomed yourself to a miserable, short life with a wild beast," Thomas whispered bitterly. He quickly turned his back to flee the terrifying room. "You will never survive the harshness of the coming northern winter." As the terrified southern men fled back out into the raging winter storm, the heavy doors slammed shut violently. Silas instantly and forcefully pulled Evelyn right back against his incredibly hard chest. "You made the absolutely perfect choice, my pure little Luna," he murmured darkly. His hot breath tickled her soft hair. "Because if you had chosen him, I would have mercilessly ripped his beating heart right out of his chest. And then I would have gladly burned the entire South to ash just to keep you locked in my room." His possessive, iron-like grip tightened significantly around her waist. It left absolutely no room for escape, doubt, or any lingering regret. The harsh world outside was freezing cold. But safely locked inside his strong, muscular arms, she was burning gloriously alive. He forcefully lifted her delicate chin with his large fingers. He made her meet his highly dangerous, entirely obsessive, and burning gaze. His amber eyes were completely dark with a fresh, surging, entirely uncontrollable sexual hunger. "The public political celebration is officially over," Silas announced loudly to his silent pack. He never once looked away from her trembling, swollen lips. "Now, let us return immediately to our private, locked chamber. I urgently need to remind you exactly who you belong to for the rest of your life." The heavy oak door of their private chamber slammed shut with a final, echoing thud. Silas immediately pressed Evelyn firmly against the cold, rough stone wall. His massive body completely trapped her in an inescapable cage of pure heat and hard muscle. The blazing fire in the hearth cast dancing, golden shadows across his heavily scarred chest. His amber eyes were completely dilated, burning with a highly dangerous, consuming fire. He gently brushed a stray lock of soft hair away from her newly marked neck. His touch was surprisingly tender for a man who had just threatened to burn the entire world. "You were utterly magnificent down there, my brave little bird," he murmured softly. His deep, rumbling voice vibrated directly into her fragile human bones. "You completely severed your fading past without a single moment of hesitation." Evelyn looked up into his intense gaze, her heart pounding furiously against her ribs. The magical golden bond connecting their souls thrummed with overwhelming, intoxicating power. She could vividly feel his immense, twisting pride, and his dark, insatiable hunger. "I meant every single word I said in that great hall," she whispered honestly into the quiet room. "I absolutely do not belong to the weak, cowardly South anymore." Silas let out a low, incredibly satisfied growl that physically shook the heavy furniture. He leaned down slowly and pressed his hot lips hungrily against her delicate jawline. "You belong exclusively to me," he declared with absolute, terrifying certainty. He effortlessly lifted her into his strong arms as if she weighed absolutely nothing. Evelyn instinctively wrapped her delicate arms tightly around his thick, powerful neck. He carried her slowly toward the massive, fur-lined bed dominating the dark room. Every single step he took felt exactly like a deliberate, ancient claiming ritual. He gently laid her down on the soft animal pelts, following her down immediately. The heavy velvet robe slipped slowly and sensually from her smooth, pale shoulders. His burning gaze traced every single inch of her exposed, highly sensitive skin. "I will worship you until you completely forget every sorrow you have ever known," he promised darkly. His large, heavily calloused hands mapped the curves of her waist with burning precision. Evelyn arched her back slightly, completely surrendering to his overwhelming, protective dominance. She was absolutely no longer afraid of the terrifying, legendary wolf of the north. She finally understood that his brutal ferocity was her absolute, impenetrable shield against the world. He kissed her deeply, demanding everything she had and giving her his entire soul in return. The bruising kiss tasted wildly of dark possessiveness, ancient magic, and undeniable destiny. She tangled her trembling fingers deeply into his thick, unruly dark hair. A soft, desperate whimper escaped her swollen, heavily bruised lips. Silas immediately swallowed the beautiful sound, his dark hunger reaching an absolute fever pitch. He worshipped her untouched body with a fierce, terrifying devotion that bordered on pure madness. The magical mark on her neck burned brightly, syncing their rapid heartbeats perfectly together. She could clearly feel the ancient, savage beast inside him purring with deep, absolute contentment. He had finally found his eternal mate in the darkness, and he would never let her go. The harsh, freezing winter storm raged violently outside the thick, ancient castle walls. But safely inside this dark room, they were completely consumed by a roaring, unstoppable fire. Evelyn realized with blinding clarity that she had not lost her precious freedom today. She had simply traded a gilded, empty cage for an absolute, incredibly powerful empire. Silas pulled back slightly, his broad chest heaving heavily as he stared into her shining eyes. "You are the absolute only light in my dark, bloody world, Evelyn," he confessed hoarsely. "And I will gladly burn down the entire universe if it ever tries to take you away." She smiled softly, pulling the terrifying, magnificent Alpha back down into her welcoming arms. "Then let the whole world burn," she whispered bravely, sealing her fate completely with the Monster King. The peaceful, exhausted morning was violently shattered by the deafening sound of ancient war horns. Evelyn woke up suddenly, completely wrapped in the warm, fiercely protective embrace of her Alpha. Silas was already fully awake beside her. His glowing amber eyes were completely alert and dangerously sharp with the promise of fresh violence. The heavy magical bond connecting their souls thrummed with a sudden, urgent spike of pure aggression. "The cowardly South has foolishly decided to break our fragile peace," Silas growled deeply. He slowly and reluctantly untangled his massive body from her soft, trembling limbs. He pressed a surprisingly gentle, lingering kiss to her bare, freshly marked shoulder. "Thomas ran crying back to your weak father, and now their pathetic armies are marching on my borders." Evelyn felt a brief, cold flash of terrifying fear course through her veins. But the golden magical mark on her delicate neck instantly warmed her freezing blood. She was absolutely no longer the terrified, helpless political pawn they had cruelly thrown away. She sat up bravely in the massive bed, pulling the thick velvet robe tightly over her bruised skin. "How many armed men are they sending against our territory?" she asked clearly. Her soft voice was surprisingly steady and entirely devoid of typical Southern panic. Silas paused his rapid dressing, looking at her with a heavy mixture of dark surprise and immense pride. "They have cowardly allied themselves with the savage, rogue wolf factions from the eastern wastelands. They foolishly believe they can easily overwhelm my heavily fortified borders with sheer, mindless numbers." He strapped a massive, ancient, blood-stained broadsword to his broad, muscular back. He looked exactly like a terrifying, completely unstoppable god of war preparing to bathe the world in red. "I must ride out immediately to personally slaughter their arrogant, foolish generals. I will brutally crush this pathetic, annoying rebellion before it ever reaches our sacred valley." He walked purposefully back to the massive bed and forcefully gripped her delicate chin. "You will stay locked safely inside this impenetrable stone fortress under heavily armed guard. Do not ever leave these thick stone walls until I return to you completely victorious." Evelyn looked deeply into his intense, burning amber eyes and nodded her head slowly. But deep inside her newly awakened soul, an entirely new, powerful fire was beginning to burn brightly. As the heavy oak door slammed shut behind her ferocious mate, the massive fortress erupted into organized chaos. She could clearly hear the frantic shouting of guards and the terrifying howling of preparing warriors outside. Evelyn did not hide under the thick bed furs and cry like a weak, delicate southern lady. She stood up tall and proud, her bare feet pressing firmly onto the freezing cold stone floor. She quickly dressed herself in the thick, practical, dark leather garments typically worn by northern women. She walked confidently out of the private master chamber with her beautiful head held incredibly high. The remaining heavily armed guards in the dark hallway immediately bowed their heads in deep, unquestioning respect. They could all clearly smell the overwhelmingly powerful, highly possessive scent of their alpha heavily layered on her skin. She walked purposefully toward the high stone battlements overlooking the snowy main courtyard. Blind panic was rapidly beginning to spread among the elderly, the women, and the young children left behind. They were absolutely terrified of the incoming rogue wolves who were globally infamous for their unspeakable cruelty. Evelyn stepped up boldly to the edge of the massive stone balcony overlooking the highly frightened crowd. She took a deep, grounding breath of freezing air. She let the ancient, powerful magic of the lunar mark fully amplify her hidden inner strength. Do not show a single ounce of fear today, her clear, commanding voice rang out across the freezing courtyard. The panicked, chaotic whispers died instantly as hundreds of desperate, fearful eyes looked up at her standing there. Your powerful alpha has gone to completely destroy our foolish enemies on the bloody battlefield. But we must forcefully and bravely defend our sacred home from the inside. She pointed a firm, entirely unwavering finger toward the massive, heavily reinforced iron gates of the fortress. Arm yourselves immediately with whatever sharp, deadly steel you can find in the armory. We are absolutely not weak, helpless sheep waiting perfectly still for the brutal slaughter. We are the fiercely proud, unbreakable pack of the North, and we will violently protect our own territory. A stunned, heavy, and completely shocked silence hung thickly over the snowy courtyard for a fleeting second. Then, a scarred, elderly female wolf threw her grey head back and let out a deafening, incredibly respectful howl. The entire massive courtyard immediately erupted into a terrifying, unified chorus of agreement and newfound, lethal courage. Evelyn felt a powerful, highly electric thrill shoot straight down her rigid, perfect spine. She had successfully and completely transformed from a discarded, pitiful sacrifice into a powerful, untouchable queen. And she was fully prepared to spill actual blood to fiercely protect the dark, beautiful empire her alpha had given her. The real, brutal war was finally beginning outside the walls. But the true Lunar of the North was entirely ready to fight to the bitter end. The freezing wind howled furiously as the first wave of rogue wolves breached the outer courtyard. They were massive, diseased beasts with rotting fur and eyes burning with unnatural starvation. Evelyn stood firmly on the high stone balcony, her knuckles white as she gripped a heavy iron crossbow. She had never killed a living creature in her entire sheltered southern life. But the magical golden mark on her delicate neck throbbed with the ancient, feral courage of her alpha. "Hold the defensive line," she screamed, her commanding voice cutting clearly through the terrifying chaos. The brave northern women and elderly guards clashed violently with the savage invaders in a spray of dark blood. The deafening sounds of tearing flesh and dying screams echoed horribly off the ancient stone walls. Evelyn aimed her heavy weapon with trembling hands and confidently pulled the cold metal trigger. The thick iron bolt flew straight and true, instantly taking down a massive rogue leaping toward a fallen child. She didn't have a single second to process the brutal kill before three more monsters scaled the lower wall. They had completely bypassed the heavy main gates, using their unnatural agility to climb the rough stone. A monstrous wolf with a torn ear locked its rabid, yellow eyes directly onto the Luna standing above. It let out a blood-curdling howl and launched itself rapidly toward the stone staircase leading to her exposed balcony. Evelyn frantically tried to reload her heavy crossbow, but her numb fingers fumbled with the complex mechanism. The savage beast closed the dangerous distance in mere seconds, its jaws snapping wildly at the freezing air. Two loyal northern guards stepped bravely in front of her, but the monster swatted them away like broken toys. Evelyn dropped the useless crossbow and desperately drew the short, sharp dagger from her leather belt. She backed up slowly until her spine hit the cold, unforgiving stone of the fortress wall. There was absolutely nowhere left to run, and her powerful alpha was miles away on a bloody battlefield. The rogue wolf lunged forward, its foul, rotting breath washing over her pale, terrified face. But right at that exact, terrifying moment, a massive surge of pure agony ripped through her magical bond. It wasn't her own physical pain, it was the psychic shockwave of Silas realizing his mate was in mortal danger. Miles away on the frozen battlefield, the Alpha King suddenly stopped his brutal slaughter of the Southern army. He felt the distinct, icy chill of the rogue wolf's murderous intent directed perfectly at his marked Luna. A terrifying, unearthly roar erupted from Silas's broad chest, freezing the blood of every single soldier around him. His glowing amber eyes shifted instantly to a blinding, demonic gold of absolute, apocalyptic fury. He didn't care about the retreating Southern generals or the strategic military victory anymore. He completely abandoned his entire victorious army, transforming into a massive, shadowy blur of unprecedented speed. He was tearing across the frozen wasteland, breaking every natural law of physics to reach his endangered mate. Back on the bloody balcony, Evelyn thrust her small dagger forward with all her remaining, desperate strength. The sharp steel sank deeply into the rogue wolf's thick shoulder, but it barely slowed the massive beast down. The monster's heavy claws swiped viciously, tearing a long, bloody gash down Evelyn's left arm. She cried out in sudden pain, dropping the bloody dagger as she fell hard onto the unforgiving stone floor. The savage wolf loomed over her fallen body, completely ready to tear her fragile throat out. Evelyn closed her eyes tightly, bracing herself for the final, fatal bite that would end her short life. But suddenly, a deafening sonic boom shook the entire ancient fortress to its very foundations. A massive, terrifying shadow crashed violently onto the high balcony like a falling meteor from the angry heavens. Silas had crossed the impossible distance in mere minutes, driven by a psychotic, unstoppable need to protect his own. He didn't even bother to use his massive broadsword against the terrified, whimpering rogue wolf. He forcefully grabbed the massive beast by its dirty throat with one bare, blood-soaked hand. With a sickening, effortless crunch, Silas completely crushed the monster's thick windpipe and threw the lifeless body aside. The invading rogue wolves suddenly stopped their brutal attack, paralyzed by the overwhelming, suffocating aura of their enraged king. Silas fell heavily to his knees beside Evelyn, his massive hands trembling violently as he saw the fresh blood on her pale arm. The terrifying, untouchable god of war looked completely shattered by the sight of her minor injury. He gently pulled her small, injured body against his incredibly hard, protective chest. "I am here, my perfect little bird," he choked out, his deep voice thick with absolute, mind-numbing terror. "I will personally slaughter every single living thing on this earth for daring to touch you." Silas gently lifted Evelyn from the blood-soaked stone of the high balcony. His massive, heavily muscled chest was still heaving with uncontrollable, violent rage. The remaining rogue wolves in the courtyard were instantly slaughtered by the returning northern army. The loyal soldiers tore the filthy invaders apart without a single shred of mercy or hesitation. But Silas did not care at all about the grand, bloody military victory unfolding outside his thick walls. He only cared deeply about the warm, red blood slowly dripping from his mate's delicate left arm. He carried her down the spiraling stone stairs as if she were made of fragile, priceless spun glass. He completely ignored the bowing, terrified generals who had rushed eagerly to report their battle success. He violently kicked open the heavy, reinforced oak door to their private, deeply hidden chamber. He laid her down incredibly softly on the luxurious, thick furs of the massive wooden bed. "Bring the royal healer to this room immediately," his terrifying voice thundered loudly through the stone corridors. "If my Luna loses another single drop of blood, I will personally execute every physician in this entire fortress." Evelyn winced slightly as her adrenaline finally faded, letting the sharp, burning pain fully take over. Silas immediately fell heavily to his scarred knees beside the massive bed. His glowing amber eyes were completely filled with dark, unspeakable agony and terrifying self-hatred. He quickly grabbed a clean, white linen cloth from the heavy, antique oak dresser. He gently pressed it against her shallow, bleeding wound with impossible, heartbreaking tenderness. His huge, terrifying, battle-scarred hands were trembling violently for the very first time in his long, brutal life. "I completely and utterly failed to protect you from those filthy, disgusting beasts," he whispered hoarsely into the quiet room. "I should absolutely never have left you alone in this vulnerable, weakly guarded fortress." Evelyn reached out slowly and deliberately with her uninjured right hand. She gently touched his intensely tense, heavily clenched jawline. "I am not a fragile, broken porcelain doll, Silas," she said softly but incredibly firmly. "I successfully held the defensive line until you miraculously returned to me." Silas leaned heavily into her warm, soft touch like a desperate man seeking salvation. He took a deep, desperate, grounding breath of her intoxicating lavender and honey scent. "You are the absolute, undeniable beating heart of my entire empire now," he stated darkly. "Your beautiful blood is infinitely more precious to me than any amount of northern gold or conquered land." The terrified, elderly royal healer rushed frantically into the room carrying a wooden box of medicinal herbs. The old man shook uncontrollably under the alpha's intensely murderous, glowing golden glare. "Clean the wound perfectly," Silas ordered, his deep voice dropping to a lethal, freezing whisper. "Leave a single, ugly scar on her perfect, flawless skin, and you will absolutely not live to see tomorrow's sunrise." The royal healer quickly and highly efficiently stitched the minor cut with trembling but practiced fingers. He carefully applied a thick, soothing, magical green salve to the angry red skin. Silas watched every single tiny, insignificant movement with the paranoid, dangerous intensity of a starving predator. He was fully ready to forcefully snap the old man's neck if he caused Evelyn even a fraction of extra pain. Once the shallow wound was securely and perfectly bandaged, Silas immediately banished the terrified healer from the room. He carefully climbed into the large, comfortable bed and pulled Evelyn securely into his strong, incredibly warm arms. He meticulously positioned her injured arm so it rested completely safely against his broad, muscular chest. "The foolish, incompetent guards who let those rogues breach the wall will be severely and publicly punished," Silas growled deeply. "I will personally hang every single one of them from the highest watchtower by tomorrow morning." Evelyn looked up carefully at his handsome, deeply furious face. She was feeling the overwhelming, almost suffocating weight of his absolute, terrifying devotion. They fought incredibly bravely against impossible, overwhelming odds to protect the innocent, she argued softly to her angry king. "They freely gave their own lives trying desperately to keep those savage monsters away from me." Silas immediately tightened his possessive, iron-like grip around her narrow, delicate waist. "Their absolute only purpose in this miserable life was to keep you perfectly safe, and they failed miserably. Anyone who ever fails you will immediately face my absolute, unrelenting, and bloody wrath." He buried his handsome face deeply into her soft, unmarked neck. He pressed his hot lips right over the golden, fully healed magical claim mark he had given her. "I am going to build a brand new, completely impenetrable fortress just for you," he promised obsessively. "I will completely surround you with a massive army of my most elite, ruthless, and fanatically loyal killers. No one will ever be allowed to look at you, touch you, or even breathe your air ever again." Evelyn realized the sheer, terrifying depth of the beautiful madness she had permanently awakened inside his dark soul. The fearsome, legendary wolf of the north had completely surrendered his entire sane mind to her. She gently stroked his dark, unruly hair, fully and willingly accepting her dark, glorious, and permanent fate. I am perfectly safe right here in your strong arms, she whispered sweetly into the quiet, dimly lit room. You are the absolute only impenetrable fortress I will ever truly need in this dangerous life. Silas let out a deep, rumbling, animalistic purr of immense, absolute, and total satisfaction. The brutal, bloody reckoning against the Southern army outside the walls would fiercely continue until the bloody dawn. But securely inside this dark, quiet chamber, the terrifying king was happily and permanently locked away in his willing, beautiful cage. The brutal northern winter suddenly felt incredibly warm inside the grand great hall. Silas sat proudly on the massive, ancient bone throne with Evelyn securely on his muscular lap. He absolutely refused to let her delicate feet touch the cold stone floor ever again. Her injured arm was perfectly bandaged and resting carefully against his broad, protective chest. The massive iron doors groaned open, revealing the defeated, miserable Southern king and his lords. They were dragged roughly into the hall by massive, heavily armed northern warriors. Evelyn's cruel father looked completely broken, his expensive silk robes covered in dark mud and fresh blood. Thomas was shivering violently right beside him, his handsome face pale with absolute, sickening terror. They all fully expected to see a bloody, destroyed Southern princess begging for her pathetic life. Instead, they saw a radiant, untouchable goddess wearing the heavy, magical mark of the Alpha. Evelyn looked down at the kneeling, trembling men with completely cold, entirely emotionless eyes. She no longer felt a single shred of fear or lingering pity for her former, treacherous family. You coldly sent me here to die miserably in the frozen wasteland, Evelyn stated clearly. Her commanding voice echoed powerfully, carrying the undeniable, magical weight of a true Luna. You cowardly threw me directly to the wild beasts so you could comfortably save yourselves. The Southern king looked up, his watery eyes widening in utter, unbelievable, and complete shock. He clearly saw the legendary, terrifying wolf of the north gently stroking her long, soft hair. Silas looked at the Southern men with glowing amber eyes filled with absolute, pure murder. You are all breathing my air right now only because she has not explicitly asked for your deaths, Silas growled. The deep, vibrating threat completely paralyzed every single Southern lord in the massive, silent room. My beautiful Luna holds all of your miserable, pathetic lives tightly in her delicate little hands. Thomas fell completely forward, pressing his sweaty forehead desperately against the freezing stone floor. Please, Evelyn, we were totally blind and incredibly foolish. Thomas begged desperately and loudly. We will gladly pay any amount of gold to bring you safely back home to the south. Silas immediately let out a terrifying, deafening roar that physically shook the heavy iron chandeliers. His massive muscles tensed violently, entirely ready to instantly rip Thomas limb from bloody limb. But Evelyn gently placed her soft, uninjured hand directly over Silas's wildly beating heart. The rampaging, furious beast inside him calmed down instantly under her magical, soothing touch. The Southern prisoners watched this impossible, mind-bending miracle with absolute, pure horror. A delicate, fragile girl had effortlessly tamed the most dangerous, bloodthirsty monster in the known world. I absolutely do not want your dirty gold, and I have no home in the south, Evelyn declared smoothly. She sat up taller, fully and willingly embracing the overwhelming, intoxicating power of her dark new empire. I am the absolute Luna of the North, and you are all trespassing in my sacred territory. Silas smiled darkly, a feral, incredibly proud expression twisting his handsome, scarred features. You will all officially sign the new treaty giving her complete, absolute control over your southern lands. And then you will quickly crawl back on your bloody knees to your pathetic, empty castles. The Southern king openly wept, instantly realizing he had foolishly given away his most powerful asset. He had personally handed the ultimate, unstoppable weapon directly to his worst, most hated enemy. Every northern wolf in the vast hall suddenly dropped to one knee in perfect, silent unison. They respectfully and willingly bowed their heavy heads to the incredible woman who commanded their fierce king. The magical golden bond burned brightly on her delicate neck, sealing their fates together forever. Evelyn leaned her tired head back comfortably against Silas's strong, completely unyielding shoulder. She had finally found absolute safety, extreme devotion, and terrifying, unbending, and eternal love. The weak, fearful girl who had cried alone in the cold wedding carriage was completely, permanently dead. The untouchable, glorious Queen of the North had finally taken her rightful, bloody throne. The heavy iron doors of the great hall closed finally, shutting away the trembling southern lords forever. Evelyn stood up gracefully from the ancient bone throne, her small hand resting securely in the Alpha's massive grip. Silas absolutely refused to let her walk up the cold, winding stone stairs to their private sanctuary. He effortlessly lifted his beautiful Luna into his strong arms, carrying her exactly like a priceless, fragile treasure. The fierce northern warriors instantly bowed their heads in deep, absolute reverence as their king carried his mate away. The massive oak door of their private chamber clicked shut, permanently sealing them in their own perfect, dark world. The blazing fire in the large stone hearth cast warm, dancing golden shadows across Silas's heavily scarred face. He gently placed Evelyn down on the thick, luxurious animal furs covering the massive wooden bed. He did not immediately touch her, instead dropping heavily to his scarred knees before her with terrifying, absolute devotion. His glowing amber eyes were entirely filled with a deep, obsessive, and completely unbreakable love. "You were utterly magnificent today, my perfect queen," he whispered, his deep voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated emotion. "You completely crushed your miserable past and proudly claimed my entire bloody empire as your own." Evelyn smiled softly, reaching out to gently trace the rugged, masculine lines of his highly tense jaw. She absolutely no longer saw a terrifying, bloodthirsty monster when she looked directly at the fearsome wolf of the north. She only saw the immensely powerful, fiercely loyal man who had gladly burned the world just to keep her safe. "It is not just your lonely empire anymore, Silas," she replied smoothly, her voice filled with quiet, absolute confidence. "It is our eternal kingdom, and I will fiercely protect it just as ruthlessly as you fiercely protect me." Silas let out a deep, highly satisfied growl that made the magical golden mark on her neck throb warmly. He leaned forward slowly and pressed a burning, incredibly reverent kiss to her soft, delicate knee. He completely worshipped her untouched beauty with the fanatic, desperate zeal of a starving, dying man finally finding salvation. His large, heavily calloused hands mapped every single delicate curve of her body with agonizing, beautiful slowness. He completely stripped away her heavy, velvet robes until she was perfectly bare under his burning, insatiable gaze. Every single gentle brush of his rough fingertips sent a violent, intoxicating shockwave of pure electricity through her veins. "I will gladly spend every single remaining day of my long, brutal life worshipping you," he vowed darkly into the quiet room. "I will completely drown you in my dark love until you cannot even remember how to breathe without me." He suddenly surged upward, completely covering her soft, eager lips with a bruising, desperate, and entirely all-consuming kiss. Evelyn tangled her trembling fingers deeply into his thick, dark hair, forcefully pulling him even closer to her racing heart. The harsh, freezing winter storm continued to rage violently outside the thick, impenetrable castle walls. But safely locked inside their dark, private sanctuary, the roaring, unstoppable fire of their passion consumed absolutely everything. She was completely and permanently no longer the weak, terrified virgin sacrifice sent to die in the brutal north. She was the absolute, undeniable center of the universe for the most dangerous, powerful alpha in the entire known world. Silas passionately claimed her body and soul over and over again until the pale dawn finally broke the cold horizon. He violently branded his eternal, obsessive love permanently onto her very soul, leaving absolutely no room for any lingering doubts. The terrifying, legendary, bloodthirsty beast had been completely and irrevocably tamed by a single, fragile southern girl. But he was only truly tame and gentle for her, forever remaining a ruthless, bloody nightmare for anyone else who dared to exist. Evelyn finally drifted to sleep wrapped tightly in his unbreakable embrace, a genuinely happy, victorious smile on her swollen lips. The long, terrifying political hunt was completely, absolutely, and permanently over. The untouchable, glorious Luna of the North had finally found her true, eternal home strictly in the arms of her devoted monster.